I was still wearing my wedding dress when my stepmother leaned in close and said it. "Now that you're married, you should put that kid in a home." Her breath smelled like wine and roses. She smiled at me like she was giving me good advice, like she thought I'd thank her for it. Before I could respond, my father joined her. "It's time you let go of your mistake," he said, looking past me like I wasn't even there. That moment lasted no more than 10 seconds, but something in me cracked open. I didn't argue, I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just stood there, stunned and quiet, feeling like a child again, like I was 13 trying to be small while my father scolded me for crying too loud at dinner, like I was 21, pregnant and terrified, when he told me I had ruined my life, like I was still waiting for him to look at my son and see a human being instead of a problem. I said nothing, not because I agreed, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't trust my voice to hold steady under the weight of everything I wanted to say. I walked away. I made it through the rest of the toasts. I smiled when Logan reached for my hand under the table. I pretended not to notice how my stepmother sat straight as a pin, like someone who had already claimed victory. I laughed when someone made a joke about our honeymoon flight being at 6 a.m. And all the while, my son, Ezra, sat 2 tables away quietly coloring on the back of the menu with the hotel pen I'd found for him earlier. He didn't speak much in crowds. That night, he hadn't said anything since the ceremony, but he was watching. He always watched. The music began for our first dance. The DJ adjusted the mic. Logan offered his hand, smiling that easy, safe smile of his, and I stood to meet him. That's when Ezra rose from his chair. He held a folded sheet of paper in his hand. His voice was calm and clear. "Before you dance," he said, "I think everyone should read this letter my mom kept hidden." The room stilled. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations dropped. My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear, but from something deeper, something older. I knew that letter. I wrote it 2 years ago during one of the worst nights of my life. I never meant for anyone to see it, especially not him. And now my 12-year-old son was standing in front of 100 people, ready to tell the truth I had tried to keep buried. My father's face turned red. Veronica leaned forward as if to stop him. She hesitated, because now everyone was watching. And Ezra wasn't afraid. He looked only at me. "I think they should know what kind of mom you really are," he said. And then he began to read. The vineyard looked like a dream that afternoon. Rows of olive trees lined the gravel path leading to the ceremony site, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers in the garden. Everything smelled like lavender and warm bread. I remember thinking, this is what peace must feel like. It was my wedding day, and for once, I felt like maybe I hadn't ruined everything. I had chosen a small guest list, not because I wanted it that way, but because there were only a handful of people I could count on. Logan's family made up most of the crowd. They hugged Ezra when they saw him and brought him a small gift to open during the reception. They didn't ask questions about his autism or why he sometimes flapped his hands when he got overwhelmed. They just accepted him. I had spent 12 years waiting for that kind of love. Ezra was born when I was 21, and every day since had been a fight to protect him from people who saw him as a problem. His father left when I was still pregnant. He said he wasn't ready to be a special needs dad, as if that was some specialized profession. My own father was worse. When Ezra was diagnosed at 3, my dad sat across the table, stone-faced, and said, "What did you expect? You always had bad judgment." From that day forward, he treated my son like he was something I had brought into the world by mistake. My stepmother, Veronica, never tried to hide her opinions either. She smiled in public, but whispered cruel things when no one else was around. When Ezra had meltdowns as a toddler, she'd sigh and say, "Are you sure this isn't just bad parenting?" For years, I tried to keep the peace. I hoped that if I just showed them Ezra's progress, if I dressed him nicely and told them about his good days, they'd eventually come around. But they never did. They saw him as a disruption, a burden, an anchor I refused to cut loose. By the time Logan came into our lives, I had almost given up on the idea of anyone truly loving us. I met him at the hospital where I worked. He was visiting a friend in recovery, and I was the nurse checking vitals. We started talking in the hallway, then over coffee, then every weekend for months. He didn't run when I told him about Ezra. He asked questions, he showed up. He brought Ezra puzzles, taught him how to make pancakes, memorized his favorite books. The first time Ezra took Logan's hand without being prompted, I cried in the kitchen and didn't even try to hide it. That was the first time I believed I could be loved without conditions. So when Logan proposed, it wasn't a hard decision. He wasn't just choosing me, he was choosing both of us. We planned the wedding together with Ezra in mind. He picked the colors, the cake flavor, even the music. I let him wear sneakers with his little navy suit. He said they made him feel safe and fast. When I saw him at the end of the aisle that day, holding a small fidget cube in one hand and smiling nervously at the flowers, I knew I had done something right. He was safe. He was loved. That had always been my promise to him, even if no one else understood. After the ceremony, the sun dipped behind the hills, and the golden hour made everything glow. I remember holding my wine glass and watching Logan talk to his parents, while Ezra sat on a picnic blanket nearby, building towers out of butter packets. The DJ was setting up. Kids were chasing each other between tables, and I allowed myself, for the first time in years, to feel light. That's when Veronica approached me. She was dressed in deep blue, her makeup perfect, her heels clicking softly across the patio stones. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I should have known then. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I stood there in my wedding dress, my arms full of roses and promises, and I listened. She waited until no one was near before she leaned in. Her voice was low and sweet, like she was sharing a secret meant just for me. "Now that you're married," she said, "you should put that kid in a home." My first instinct was to laugh, but when I looked at her, she wasn't joking. My father joined her seconds later. He didn't hesitate. He didn't soften his words. "It's time you let go of your mistake." That was how they saw my son. Not as family, not as a boy, as a mistake. And in that moment, all the years of trying to earn their approval collapsed under the weight of their cruelty. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just turned and walked away. Because there was only one person whose voice mattered now, only one person who had lived every hard day beside me, and that person was watching everything. Ezra. I found Ezra behind the tent, sitting quietly on a bench near the garden fountain. The guests hadn't noticed the exchange I'd just had with my father and Veronica. Laughter still carried over the vineyard, the clinking of glasses, the soft shuffle of shoes on gravel, the violinist warming up near the dance floor. It all sounded like celebration, but I felt like I had been shoved underwater. Ezra was spinning his fidget cube in one hand, his fingers moving with practiced rhythm. When I sat beside him, he didn't look up. I said nothing at first. I just sat there feeling the lace of my dress scratch at my shoulders, feeling my chest ache from holding in the anger. I looked at my son, really looked at him. His dress shoes were scuffed already. He had a smudge of chocolate on his tie. His hair was flattened in the back from the clip-on bow tie he had taken off an hour ago. And he looked perfect to me. He glanced at me sideways. "You look sad." "I'm not," I lied. He nodded like he knew I was lying but didn't want to push me. Then he pulled something from the inside pocket of his jacket, a folded paper worn at the corners. "I brought this, just in case I needed to remember." I recognized the paper immediately. My handwriting, that letter. I had written it 2 years ago during one of Ezra's hardest weeks. He had been struggling with school, having meltdowns, refusing to eat. I had been exhausted and alone. One night, after finally getting him to sleep, I sat down and wrote him a letter. Not to give him, but to remind myself who I was. I folded it and slipped it into one of the books he liked to read with me. I never expected him to find it. "Why did you bring that?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "Sometimes it helps." I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding. I wanted to tell him what had just happened with my parents, but I didn't want to place that weight on his shoulders. He had carried enough already. "Hey," I said, turning toward him, "you know I'd never leave you, right?" He looked me in the eye. "I know, but they want you to." My stomach twisted. He had heard them. Of course he had. He always noticed things most people missed. I heard her say it, he continued, and then Grandpa said it too. I felt the tears sting before I could stop them. I don't care what they think, he said, his voice steady. You shouldn't either. I wrapped my arm around him and pulled him close. He let me. Sometimes he shied away from touch, especially when overstimulated, but today he leaned into it. The rest of the evening blurred after that moment. I returned to the reception with him at my side. I smiled through more toasts, accepted congratulations, laughed politely when people told me how lucky Logan was. Logan was good. He didn't question why I was quieter. He didn't press me for details. He just reached for my hand and squeezed it when I needed it. Veronica and my father stayed on the edges of the crowd. They acted as though nothing had happened. They smiled during photos and chatted with Logan's family. It was a performance they had mastered, pretending for the world while letting the poison leak out only when no one else could see it. I should have said something then. I should have stood at the mic and made it clear that my son would never be discarded for the sake of appearances. But I didn't. I swallowed it all down because I didn't want to ruin the night for Logan. I had fought so hard to get here. A wedding, a family, a future. I was afraid that speaking up would crack it all open, so I stayed quiet. Ezra didn't. When the DJ announced our first dance, Logan held out his hand and I stood to meet him. The song began. It was soft and slow, one of those tracks we picked months ago while cooking dinner. People started gathering, holding up their phones, clapping lightly as we stepped onto the dance floor. Then Ezra stood up. At first I thought he was just overwhelmed and needed space, but he walked straight toward the mic, calm, confident, sure of himself. He climbed onto the small wooden platform, holding that folded letter in both hands. He didn't wait for permission. He spoke into the mic. Before you dance, I think everyone should hear this. The music stopped. The entire vineyard went silent. All eyes turned toward him. Logan stepped forward, confused, but I held out my hand. Let him, I whispered. Ezra unfolded the paper. He smoothed it gently on the podium like it was something sacred. I found this in one of my books, he said. My mom wrote it. She didn't know I had it. But I think you should all hear what kind of mom she really is. Every heartbeat in the room fell into sync. No one moved, no one whispered. And then, my son began to read the letter I had written to remind myself I was still a good mother. Ezra held the microphone with both hands. His fingers were shaking, but his voice wasn't. He cleared his throat once, then began reading. To my sweet Ezra. The moment I heard my own words spoken out loud, my breath caught. I remembered writing them, curled on the couch with the lamp on low, trying to quiet the feeling that I was failing him. That night had been one of the worst. Ezra had cried for hours, begging to go live somewhere else, somewhere for kids, like him. I had wrapped my arms around him and promised that he was never going anywhere. But when he finally slept, I collapsed into a different kind of exhaustion. Not from his needs, but from the fear that maybe the world would never make space for him. So I wrote that letter. It was never meant to be read in front of 100 people under wedding lights and a rented tent. But here we were. Ezra's voice stayed clear. If the world ever makes you feel small or broken, know this. You were never a mistake. You saved my life. Every hard day with you is still the best part of being alive. I will never choose anyone over you. You are not a burden. You are the reason I fight. His words rang out over the quiet lawn. People were holding their glasses without drinking. A couple at the far table had their arms around each other. Logan stood near the dance floor, stunned but calm, waiting to see what would happen next. Ezra paused. He looked at me. I'm sorry I took it, he said, but I think they needed to hear it. Then he turned toward the crowd. My mom never said bad things about my grandparents. She just said they didn't understand me. But tonight I heard what they really think. I heard what they told her behind the tent. That I should go live in a home. That I was a mistake. There was a sharp inhale from someone in the front row. People started whispering. Ezra didn't flinch. He folded the letter again, slowly, carefully, like it mattered. But I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not sorry I'm here. My mom didn't ruin her life. She gave me mine. The last sentence hit the air like a thunderclap. There was a long pause before anything moved. Then, from the back of the reception, someone started clapping. It was Logan's younger sister. Then another voice joined in. Then more. A small wave of applause moved across the lawn, not the kind of polite wedding clapping that people give during a toast. This was different. It was deliberate. It was a line being drawn. I watched as Veronica lowered her champagne glass. Her jaw tightened. My father stood next to her, unmoving, his face stiff with fury and disbelief. Neither of them clapped. Neither of them looked at Ezra. But Logan did. He crossed the distance between us and stepped onto the platform. He put a hand on Ezra's shoulder, then looked out at the guests. "I think that says more about this family than anything else tonight," he said. Then he looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded. My throat felt raw. "I'll dance with you when you're ready," he said. I stepped up beside them, looked down at Ezra, and cupped his face in my hands. He looked up at me with those wide, searching eyes that had never stopped watching, never stopped noticing. "You didn't need to protect me," I said. "I wasn't," he replied. "I was telling the truth." I held him in front of everyone. I stopped worrying about appearances or who was uncomfortable. He needed to know that what he did mattered, that it was brave, that it wasn't too much, that he wasn't too much. After a few minutes, Logan stepped forward and held out his hand again. I took it. Ezra stepped down and returned to his table. Someone had saved him a seat. One of Logan's cousins handed him a fresh plate of strawberries. As Logan and I walked to the center of the dance floor, I heard Veronica call my name. I turned. She stood there with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I didn't mean it like that," she said too loudly for the moment. I didn't respond. My father added, "We were just thinking about your future." That was when I realized what had changed. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer feared losing something I never really had. The only family I needed was standing with me on that floor, holding my hand, waiting patiently while I decided how to move forward. I looked at them one last time and said, "If you see my son as a burden, you don't know me at all." Then I turned back toward the music. Logan squeezed my hand. The melody returned, soft and slow, filling the air. And we danced. The first dance began, but it didn't feel like the start of a wedding tradition. It felt like a declaration, one that wasn't just about love between a husband and wife, but about survival, loyalty, and choosing who belongs at your table. Logan's hand was warm in mine. We moved slowly, surrounded by people I once worried wouldn't understand us. Now they stood still, watching with a respect that hadn't been asked for. It had been earned. I kept my eyes on Ezra. He sat with his back straight, a plate of strawberries in front of him, his fingers picking them apart methodically. Logan's sister leaned over and whispered something that made him smile. My son, who struggled to make eye contact with strangers, who used to flinch when the world got too loud, was calm. He had taken the most frightening moment a child could face, standing against his own blood, and he didn't flinch. That was the turning point, but the climax came in what followed. After our dance ended, I was pulled into small conversations. Guests approached quietly, respectfully. A woman I barely knew said, "I wish my mother had fought for me like that." A man in his 50s told me his younger brother had lived in a group home most of his life. "He never got the kind of love your son clearly has," he said. "I don't know what kind of person it made him, but I know what kind of pain it left in me." These weren't just compliments, they were confessions. People telling me that something in them had shifted. But not everyone was moved. Veronica pulled me aside again near the drink station, her voice clipped. "You let that boy humiliate your family in front of everyone." I met her gaze without hesitation. "He told the truth. You're the ones who are ashamed of it." My father joined us. "You're emotional. This isn't the place for this kind of drama." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it sounded coming from him. For years, I had swallowed every insult, every judgment, every calculated dig from the two of them. I kept the peace out of fear, guilt, and some misguided hope that maybe someday they would come around. But that moment had passed. Ezra had spoken for both of us. Now it was my turn. "You think he embarrassed us?" I asked. "He did what neither of you ever had the courage to do. He stood up for someone he loves." Veronica rolled her eyes. "You're being theatrical." "No," I said. "I'm being a mother." I walked away. Back at the table, Ezra was showing Logan's niece how to do a number pattern he liked. They were both giggling. His laughter cut through the tension like sunlight. Later in the evening, after the cake and the bouquet toss, Logan found me near the edge of the patio. He slipped his arm around my waist. "You know what the best part of today was?" he asked. "I'm scared to guess." He kissed the side of my head. "Watching Ezra become the bravest person in the room, and knowing that comes from you." I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. For so long, I had questioned whether I was doing right by Ezra, whether I had made his life harder by keeping him close, whether I should have pushed him to be something the world considered easier, quieter, more acceptable. But watching him tonight, clear, articulate, unafraid, I saw it plainly. He didn't need to be changed. He just needed to be believed in. One final moment sealed everything. As we were packing up, gathering favors, and hugging the last few guests, Veronica and my father approached Logan. "You seem like a good man," my father said, "but you might not know what you're signing up for with that boy." Logan stared at him for a long second. Then he smiled, slow and sure. "I know exactly what I signed up for," he said. "A son who stood up for his mom in front of a room full of adults. If that's the hardest part, I'll take it." My father didn't respond. Veronica turned away first. They left without saying goodbye to me or Ezra. As they walked down the gravel path toward the parking lot, I didn't feel loss. I felt clarity. This was the cost of honesty, of choosing your child over comfort, of no longer watering down your truth so other people can swallow it more easily. We went back to our table. Ezra was tired but content. He leaned against me, his head on my shoulder. "Was that okay?" he asked softly. "You were perfect," I said. His hand found mine, and we sat that way for a long while, just breathing in the end of a long day that felt more like a beginning than a finish line. That night, in a vineyard surrounded by people who chose us, Ezra gave me a gift I never expected. He gave me my voice back. We didn't see Veronica or my father again after that night. They left without saying goodbye, and they never followed up with a call, a text, or even an excuse. For a few days, I kept checking my phone, expecting something, an apology, an explanation, even anger, but it stayed silent. I thought the silence might hurt more than the words they said, but it didn't. Their absence made space for peace. After the wedding, we took Ezra with us on our short honeymoon to Lake Tahoe. Logan insisted. He didn't want to leave Ezra behind just to fit someone else's version of what a honeymoon should look like. We rented a cabin near the water and spent the mornings hiking easy trails and the evenings playing card games by the fire. Ezra loved the stillness, the clean air, the smell of pine. One night, we made s'mores out on the deck. Logan handed Ezra a marshmallow that was slightly burnt, and instead of flinching, Ezra smiled. "It tastes better this way," he said. I stared at him for a moment. He didn't know it, but that single sentence was a full-circle moment. For years, I had been afraid that he would never find joy in the unpredictable parts of life. I used to hold my breath through every transition, every change in routine, every social setting. Now, here he was, making room for things that weren't perfect and loving them anyway. When we got back home, I framed the letter he had read at the wedding. It hangs in the hallway now, right outside his bedroom door. Every morning when I walk past it, I read a few lines, not because I need the reminder as much anymore, but because I want to honor where we've been. Ezra doesn't talk much about what happened that night. He didn't ask why his grandparents disappeared from our lives. He didn't ask me if he had done the right thing. I think he already knew. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones least willing to see you clearly. That realization used to crush me. I wasted years trying to prove to my father that I wasn't weak, that raising Ezra alone wasn't a failure. I let Veronica's quiet disapproval shape how I saw myself as a mother. I tried to fit my life into a mold that never fit us. But Ezra shattered that mold with the truth. And once the truth was out in the open, I didn't need their permission anymore. I didn't need to protect them from discomfort. I only needed to protect my son from the lie that he was less than anyone else. Since the wedding, things have been different, not just with family, but with how I carry myself. I speak up more at work. I ask for what I need. I don't apologize for being direct. I stopped filtering my choices through the fear of judgment. My family is smaller now, but it's stronger. It's real. Logan officially adopted Ezra 3 months after the wedding. We stood in the county courthouse while a judge asked Ezra if he wanted to share Logan's last name. Ezra nodded and said yes, but asked to keep Hart too. The judge smiled and approved both names. Ezra Blake Hart. It felt right. On the way home that day, Ezra held the adoption papers in his lap like a trophy. He didn't say much, just stared out the window, humming quietly. Logan reached back and tousled his hair at a red light. Ezra smiled but didn't look up. That night at dinner, he asked if he could read the letter again. The one I wrote during a dark moment. The one he read to save me from silence. He stood in the kitchen with the page unfolded, clearing his throat before starting. To my sweet Ezra. His voice was stronger this time. I didn't cry, I just listened. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "I'm not a mistake." I know that now. You never were, I said. He nodded. But now they know too. That was the final lesson. The truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back. It has weight. It has shape. And when it comes from a child who spent years in the background, it cuts through everything false. Ezra taught me that being quiet isn't the same as being weak, that loving someone fiercely means standing up, even when your voice shakes, that families aren't built from bloodlines and old traditions. They're built from choice, courage, and honesty. If you had told me years ago that my son would stand in front of a crowd and defend me, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's what happens when you raise a child who knows they are safe. They speak truth into rooms that once tried to silence them. He didn't just save me that night. He reminded me who I've always been, and I will never forget it. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you've ever felt torn between keeping the peace and protecting someone you love, I hope this gave you the strength to choose what matters. Sometimes, the loudest courage comes in the form of quiet truth, and sometimes the people we protect the most are the ones who end up saving us. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like the video. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that their love, their loyalty, and their voice still matter. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between family and doing what's right? And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and full of heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss one. From my family to yours, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.